listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. The algorithms that decide what we experience on social media and on the internet in general have a profound impact on the way we see the world. Yet giant companies like Meta and Google keep the details of these algorithms and how exactly they influence each of us a closely guarded secret. Now, researchers across the country are working to change that.
The concern that we have and that much of the other research speaks to now, though, is it's not about the algorithm itself filtering towards us. Rather, it's the manner in which we engage with it.
In the second half of this episode, we are diving deeper into the mysteries of the algorithm. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Helen Smith. It is Wednesday, the 14th of August.
Morning, Sasha. We start in Cairns today, where more details are emerging about a helicopter crash earlier this week. If you're not across it, a pilot died in the early hours of Monday morning after the chopper he was flying crashed into the Hilton Hotel in the far north Queensland city. It's since been revealed that the man was a worker at Nautilus Aviation, which owned the helicopter, and he was not authorised to fly the craft. The company has also confirmed that the man was at a work party of the night of the crash and could have been under the influence of alcohol. The hotel remains empty as repair works and investigations continue. 2 people were hospitalised after the incident.
Yeah, it was an elderly couple who was in one of the rooms and they were treated for smoke inhalation, but they're believed to be okay. Some of the wreckage of the chopper landed in the pool of the hotel while it was still on fire. It was absolutely insane. The footage and the vision of that incident are really, really breathtaking. The big thing now in the wake of this crash is a question of security, because this chopper was taken from Cairns Airport and flown into a no-fly zone. So the questions around how it wasn't picked up sooner are circulating at the moment. There are big investigations going on to figure that out. Cairns Airport has already completed a review to see whether there were any of its own security systems that failed, and it says none of its security was compromised. So take from that what you will. But yeah, there's still a lot more to come out of this incident. There are calls for Australians to be banned from entering or staying in southern Lebanon. Parliament's Joint Intelligence and Security Committee has recommended the region be designated as Hezbollah-controlled territory. By making it a declared area under the Criminal Code, that'd effectively make it illegal for Australian citizens to stay there. Security in the region has destabilised as Iran-backed Hezbollah and Israel exchange rocket fire. Meantime, Israeli officials are bracing for a potential attack from Iran within the next 24 hours. The IDF has moved to high alert status for the first time this month after observing preparations by Iran and Hezbollah to launch a strike. Interestingly, Helen, with the designated area, currently there aren't any declared areas where Australians aren't, where it would make it illegal for Australians to stay. But Aussies are currently barred from travelling to Mosul in Iraq and Al Raqqa province in Syria. So there's not a lot of places that the government decides to do this with.
Rental e-scooters have officially been banned in Melbourne, with officials saying they're unsafe. The decision to ban the scooters comes after the City Council introduced them back in 2022 as part of a 2-year trial, and Melburnians aren't happy about it. But it's not the only city to have banned or limited e-scooters. In New South Wales, there have been some trial locations over the past few years, but they've never been rolled out fully across the whole city of Sydney, and personal e-scooters still remain illegal. You can drive them on private property though. Over in SA, Adelaide has rental e-scooters, but they're only allowed in a small perimeter of the city and in North Adelaide.
Yeah, but we know that in WA, Queensland and Tasmania, they are allowed. Look, Melbourne's mayor said when, revealing this decision that too many people are riding these on footpaths, they're not parking them properly, they're tipped over and scattered around the city like confetti or like rubbish, and this creates tripping hazards. So it was time for them to go. I mean, I understand the calls to ban it, but also, when you travel around Europe, these scooters are everywhere. I don't know whether maybe Aussies, just because, treat them like a joke. We haven't had them as long. People dump them in rivers and throw them all over the place. Maybe we just can't have nice things in Australia. But in Europe, it seems to work really well, although it is worth noting Paris outlawed them last September. So, I guess you just can't trust people, especially when you can access them after a night out.
Yes, this is what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And also they go very fast.
Yeah,
they're not
true.
just like a bicycle. They are fast, these e-scooters. So, look, I understand it, but I also understand Melburnians being a little bit annoyed about it. And the fallout continues from Rachel Gunn's, aka Raygun's, Olympic breakdancing performance with a petition claiming she was selected unethically. The petition's organisers claim the 36-year-old manipulated the selection process by setting up her own governing body, and that her husband was on the selection panel. The organiser and signatories to the petition are calling for a public apology from Raygun and the Australian chef de mission Anna Mears for misleading and gaslighting the Australian public. Now, after launching less than 2 days ago, the petition has already got over 12,000 signatures.
Eek. Yeah. Some really interesting claims in that petition. We don't know who launched it, so we can't say that they're true or false, these claims, but this is what's being alleged. And yeah, 12,000 people have already signed it. Look, we've also heard from some B-girls. This is what we call breakdancing women in Australia. They're called B-girls. They've started speaking out about the whole thing, and some say that they're getting hate on social media, that they're having to go private because people are just hounding them and making fun of them and hating on them for being a breakdancer and a female in Australia. And some have accused Raygun of making a mockery of the sport, especially for women. So we got a lot of positive, like, yay, Raygun, you know, she had a go, good for her, but it seems like there's just something else potentially going on here. At the very least, breakdancers are feeling upset that that was the representation on the world stage of Australian breaking. Look, it's also, we know it's made international headlines. It's made it all the way to the Jimmy Fallon show. He had a very realistic lookalike come up on stage with him. It was played by Rachel Dratch, and here is a little bit of that.
Raygun, okay, thank you, Raygun, I see you speak through your dance moves, I understand. Okay, so is there anything else you'd like to tell us? Yeah, that one. Me? You want me to dance with you? All right, I can do that.
So yes, I don't think this is going to go away. I feel like until Raygun speaks, until we get some more information on some of these pretty serious allegations, people are going to continue to talk.
Yeah, and I mean, people are talking. I was saying to you before that even in my gym classes, in my bar and Pilates classes, everyone's talking about it. So it really is that water cooler conversation that's just not stopping.
Yeah, it'll keep going on for a while. Helen, thank you so much for being here for the headlines today. Next up, we're doing a deep dive into the internet's algorithms and the people trying to crack them.
Hey, Bension here. It's hard to overstate the power of the algorithm, the secret set of rules and priorities that automatically decides what we see on the internet, dictating the pop culture, the news, the politics, the comedy, the drama, and the tragedy each of us perceives to be happening in the world. Seeing more and more of what the algorithm thinks we would like to see gives us the really incredible, compelling, and sometimes addictive experience of constantly being served content geared specifically to us as individuals. It can be wonderful, but it can also blind us to quite a different impression of the world being fed to other people. Because what I see on my For You page is not necessarily what you're seeing on yours. And that can destabilise our sense that there's a set of facts about the world on which we can all agree. On the other hand, it can help each of us find communities and content that we just wouldn't have had access to in the place we actually live. Daniel Angus is Professor of Digital Communication at the Queensland University of Technology, and he's working on changing that. He's part of a research partnership involving universities across the country. It's called the Australian Internet Observatory. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. Can you explain to me why I see what I see on social media and why other people might see something completely different?
To understand this, we need to just dial back a few years, and that is really around the emergence of these platforms when they first started. Particularly with Instagram, for example, when it first started, you would just get the pictures in the order that they were uploaded by the people that you were following. As the platforms have grown, though, it's just impossible to manage the volume of content and to have everything relevant to you in a temporal feed. So up to a certain size, we can allow that to happen, and that will be a useful and interesting experience. Above a certain size, though, you end up just getting a lot of content which users genuinely find not that interesting. And so you need to then use some form of content recommendation in order to make sure that when people log on and maybe they're only scrolling for a minute or two, that they're encountering content that they want to see and that they do find genuinely engaging. So that really is why content recommendation exists on the platforms that we use today, is just to deal with the sheer size and volume of content that's being posted there every second of every day.
How much does it matter that each of us individually are seeing a different kind of picture of the world through social media than another person?
It matters in the way that, so some like cultural studies academics and others who observe this, they talk about it in terms of two eras, right? And the previous era we've had, the mass media era, we had a sense of a shared culture. But when you don't have those events, it's really hard to kind of strike up a conversation or know that you're part of a culture, because we're seeing lots of different things. And so that shared culture existed a lot more strongly when we're in that mass media era, where there's only a few channels on TV, where there's only, the same movies are out in the cinema are all going to see, the same music is there. There is a sense of like, if I'm listening or watching this, I'm going to be part of a conversation around that. What happens in this moment of fragmentation and social media and digital platforms, streaming content, is that we're watching, listening, and reading lots of different things. And so we're starting to see a fragmentation of those cultures and the emergence maybe of very strong subcultures, but certainly the idea of a lack perhaps in some ways sometimes of a shared kind of national culture and a sense that we're all watching or reading the same stuff.
We could talk to, I guess, all kinds of effects of that. One may be an increase in loneliness, which we've seen a lot over the past decade. But what can it do to people's political views?
So at an extreme, you can find that people start to, perhaps go down kind of rabbit holes in terms of starting to subscribe to, listen to, read more of certain forms of content. And, certainly if they start to then, that's the only kind of content that they're consuming or wanting to engage with, that could become quite dangerous. Because, if we think about the traditional newspaper, the newspaper of old tried to give, a balanced take around certain issues. So you would encounter lots of different news across lots of different kinds of topics and get a sense of a kind of like, skated across the top of it and maybe went deep in a few areas. But if you're engineering your content feeds and such to only give you certain kinds of news on certain kinds of topics, then yes, there is a possibility that you start to really only see the world through one kind of a lens. Now, we need to be really mindful here that there's been a lot of research into this, and there's this word that is often used to describe it of filter bubbles. The latest evidence suggests that filter bubbles don't exist. Actually, many of the media ecosystem, the platforms we use, do genuinely expose us to lots of different kinds of content. But just the same, it is entirely possible for people to, quickly scroll past that, right? So if you're going to get that in your feed, maybe you kind of just move past it and preferentially engage with the kinds of content that you're really interested in and allows you to kind of reflect your worldview in some way. But it's really hard to study. And so my good colleague, Axel Bruns, who's with me at QUT, he's written a book on basically filter bubbles not really being a thing. But also we've done this work recently where we've looked at enrolling about 1,000 Australians in a mass scale experiment where we got them to search the same kinds of terms into a range of search products, included also YouTube, Google News, these kinds of things. And what we found in that is that if you give people the same topic, kind of word lists, they get relatively the same kind of stuff back. The concern that we have and that much of the other research speaks to now, though, is it's not about the algorithm itself filtering towards us. Rather, it's the manner in which we engage with it. So in search, it's much more around the formulation of the search query that's probably going to drive people to find certain kinds of, say, partisan information. So, if someone's looking for Trump, for example, they're not just going to type in Donald Trump. They might say, is Donald Trump the greatest president, in United States history? Or is Donald Trump the Antichrist, right? So it's that way in which we then add that additional context that's going to steer us down those particular rabbit holes.
You mentioned that this is quite hard to study. Why do social media companies and search engines keep their algorithms secret?
There's a few reasons. Quite logically, they don't want to expose some of the workings and the details of them because they don't want them to be gamed. I mean, there's big money to be made in search engine optimization. So if your product or service is the number one, top of that list, then you stand to gain a huge amount of internet traffic as a result. And so since these things have existed, people have been out there trying to game them for attention and monetary value. And so there is that. There is that necessariness around commercial and confidence to make sure people don't game these. And let's not just talk about gaming them for financial advantage. There's political advantage perhaps and other kinds of advantages to be gained there. But in terms of resistance to researchers as well, in some ways, I feel like maybe they just get a little bit embarrassed when, say academics or others expose, hey, there's bad stuff going, right? Like people, these companies don't want their brand to be up in lights saying company or platform Y promotes hate speech on its platform or does that. And so some of it is kind of protective and maybe a bit PR laden in the way that they try and reduce the risk of the bad headlines by just saying, well, no, we're just not going to offer it to you. And some of it is, I think sometimes they just really don't pay it much attention. For them, they're making so much money through their advertising and through other kinds of mechanisms. Really, who cares about these researchers and really what they want? And so sometimes it's just benign kind of neglect that happens there that they don't really care about us.
You're doing work to try and uncover some of the secrets of these algorithms. Can you tell us a bit about that work, why you're doing it, and what you aim to find out?
Yeah, so up until now, most of the research in this discipline and field has been done through the kind of front door. If it's on a platform, say, formerly known as Twitter, it was, searching across hashtags and grabbing any of the kind of public tweets that were visible and, giving them to massive databases to try and understand what is the pulse of the nation on this particular topic and how do these networks kind of interact, these kinds of questions. But there's a limit to how much you can do and how much you can know with that, because what you're never getting from that kind of starting point is a sense of what the user on their side of this equation is seeing, interacting with, choosing not to interact with, how they're really behaving around the platform itself. And so that's where a lot of the Australian Internet Observatory is going to be heading, is that idea of kind of almost looking on the other side of this mirror and enrolling users themselves into large-scale experiments where we get them to donate various parts of their platform experience. So that might be things like share with us all the advertising that you're experiencing while you're using all of these different platforms. And from that, what we can do is stitch that advertising together to work out, are there maybe problematic advertising effects of these algorithms, that if there's someone who might be trying to do Dry July, for example, are they getting absolutely hammered by alcohol ads in that time? And yeah, that's maybe potentially problematic. But we can't see that by going to the platform because, I would get the ads that are tailored towards me. You would get the ads that are tailored towards you. There's no way for us to currently observe that personalized advertising experience of a single user. And just think of that and then scale that for every single other kind of experience, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's on Spotify, Netflix. What are the kind of unique ways that content is shaped and directed towards us? And there's lots of questions you can answer when you have a representative panel of Australians all sharing certain aspects of that kind of platform experience with you.
Here's one question that I guess I've always wanted to ask someone who has a real understanding of how these algorithms work. Are our phones listening to us when we talk? Is that just a coincidence that that ad comes up 5 minutes after we've had a chat with our friend about it?
I love this one. I get this all the time, and not just like on interviews, in parties, things like that. Look, as far as we know, no, and could be proven wrong in years to come. We find out that actually one of these products was doing it, but as far as we know, no, and no for a number of reasons. One reason is it's incredibly processor and battery and bandwidth intensive to be recording and transcribing audio constantly. So our phones are listening to us. So the fact that we have digital assistants on a lot of these phones means what they're doing is they're listening on a kind of like a very short little time frame and deleting everything as it kind of comes in. They're listening for, say, keywords and attuned to hear those kinds of keywords. And so to be doing that, you need to have a microphone that's passively listening for that. As far as we know, though, that data that's being collected there is only used for those keywords. And once they're triggered, then yes, they're using the audio to, find whatever it is or play the next song or do the action that you're requesting of it. But otherwise, that information is not being sent out. But the key clincher here is it doesn't need to. Right? These services have so much data on us that they don't even need to be listening to us to know possibly what product, service, thing we want to see next. They have our geolocative data, so they know where we are in the world. They know the people that we're with in the world because they've got their geolocative data as well. So they know that you're spent an hour with these 5 other people at this restaurant on this day of the week. And so it's through those associations that they can start to then target whether it's advertising, content, or other services. And that's largely how this kind of creepy coincidence happens, because it might be that, yes, you haven't searched for this thing, but the person you've spent lunch with has. A lot of these algorithms, they work through this logic of association, that we are not as unique as we might think we are as humans, and largely we're kind of herd animals, that we're going to like the kinds of stuff that our friends and family and others are also liking. And that's the essence of collaborative filtering that fuels our Netflix, Spotify, and most of these other kind of content recommendation systems.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Daniel Angus there. That's all we've got time for this episode of The Briefing. Before you go, we'd love it if you could share this app with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you'd like to train your algorithm to see and hear more content from us, search The Briefing Podcast on Instagram and hit that follow button. We're also on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you soon.
Listener.